What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning into the Mishmash podcast. Today, my guest is a repeat offender. That's better. That's pretty apt, right? That's better than the last one. My buddy Mike English has returned. It's the return of the mic to discuss all things music, and today a little bit more sports. We dived into the shallow end of the pool there at the end, talking about the hard existence of a Jets fan and a Vikings fan. But I wanted to talk about baseball and the connection to music further down the road. But I figured we would just hit the ground running here and jump right into the Beatles. I mean,
okay.
That's the...
Well, they kind of revolutionized the business. So, yeah, the Beatles is a great place to start.
So we were just talking off the air and in the previous episode about vocal harmonies. And it's really interesting. They're, in some ways, like the first pop band and one of the first rock bands. It's not pop rock because it's...
Definitely not pop rock.
No, the sentimentality is different. And just the quality of the compositions, it's really impressive. Like, I've learned a lot about music theory from studying just some of the songs, like Yesterday, and some of their, deeper cuts. It's amazing what they were able to do in the short time that they were together. Because did it even last 10 years?
About 10 years. That is it. And it is amazing because at the beginning, we would have termed it bubblegum music. That's very just pop, just for almost kids. And that is how they started out, the Beatles. It was very, very light. Everything was upbeat and
Yellow Submarine.
Well, no, before that. I'm talking about the very first couple albums. It was all Ain't She Sweet kind of. But I think as they grew, the writing for them, you're talking about some of the later albums, Rubber Soul and the White Album. I mean, their sound expanded so much. It just, it was no longer pop. That was definitely rock.
Yeah. And, you look at like Paperback Writer, 8 Days a Week, Hard Day's Night, all of that. That's really when they started to hit their signature sound and hit their stride, I think. Obviously, Hey Jude, to me, Hey Jude and Let It Be are like the two big Beatles songs. And there are other ones that people like more, but those are like the anthems, if you want to think
absolutely,
of it that way.
And again, being the oddball that I am, there are a lot of Beatles songs that I would prefer over Let It Be and Hey Jude, but they are the standards. There's no question. And
I'm not sure offhand who the specific writer was. I would imagine those were McCartney tunes because they just feel like they have his piano imprint on it. But
most of it really was both McCartney and Lennon for the most part until as they went further on, George Harrison started writing more. He had a lot of material, as can be shown. He put out a triple album as his first solo work. So he had a lot of music that he couldn't get onto a Beatles record and he's no longer with us, but there were interviews where he said that, they were only letting him have one or maybe two songs an album. And that was a big frustration for him because he was really getting into the writing thing. And
I can already see the tangents starting to form in my mind. I can see the graph and I can see the lines starting to bounce off because this may not be the best way to describe it and it might not be a fair accusation to make, but in some ways, I think Lennon and McCartney were the first pair of egos in the same vein as, Glenn and Don Henley from the Eagles, right? They were the co-captains of the ship.
Absolutely, and they didn't want to share.
Right.
I don't know if, again, I really wasn't into the business thing, if they all shared evenly with that or if they made sure that they kept all the writing credits, which is really where the money was anyway. Down the road, you certainly sell them books for a lot more than 20-year-old music.
Oh, yeah. So two things to bounce off of from there. First, we were talking about AI briefly in the first discussion. Did you see that McCartney's writing what he's calling the last Beatles song using AI?
I did see that. And actually, I've heard or at least seen in print, they asked AI to write a song such, a song like Stairway to Heaven. And that was like, you must be kidding.
You're an abject failure, I'm sure.
The wording was, it didn't make sense, but.
Well, so
the AI was no better.
Well, Stairway's on my my short list of topics to cover down the road. The other thing, though, because we've discussed comedy at length too, and it's funny. I feel like a lot of people who are as into music as we are also appreciative of comedy, or at least certain comedians. I think we're both Carlin fans.
Without a doubt. Yeah, I'm a sucker for almost all kinds of comedy. I mean, slapstick.
Oh, yeah.
Vaudeville. I can find humor in most things.
Mel Brooks.
Oh, without a doubt.
So I don't know if you saw the History of the World Part 2.
Yes, I did.
Okay,
yes.
so they had that whole little Beatles pastiche, which was great. I just cracked up with that. When you talked about them having that tension, the creative tension, I just pictured that whole skit, which was so funny.
It was indeed. And as long as we're discussing the Beatles, I would be remiss not to bring up the Beach Boys because we kind of hit on this a little bit in our first discussion. In the mid-'60s, they had this tremendous, I don't want to call it a rivalry, but Lennon and McCartney were quoted as saying, we listen to what Brian Wilson is doing because we know that's the next step. And Brian Wilson was a big fan of theirs, and he couldn't wait to hear what they put out because then he would have his next challenge, which really led to a lot of great music. So. Right,
and it's funny how interconnected everything is, right? Because we talked about Syd Barrett briefly with being
Pink Floyd.
Right, being the troubled musician. And Brian Wilson, I don't know how much his struggles with mental illness influenced his creativity. I feel like there has to be some sort of, hardwiring connection for certain people, right? In terms of that, I don't want to call it mental illness, but just being wired differently and then leading to the creative.
Isn't there a thin line between genius and mental illness?
I'm not sure which side of that I'm on.
I feel like I crossed over a long time ago.
I think of it more as a tightrope, and I'm always kind of...
kind of balance yourself. But Brian Wilson, he only heard the world in monotones. I mean, he couldn't hear out of his one ear, from having had a punctured eardrum as a child. And that really affected, I guess, how he heard music. But no one will ever understand where he got the impetus for some of them sounds because, again, talking as we did with Pink Floyd, the sounds that he came up with to put on records, it's like, how would you even think of that?
Right. And see, that's my problem. I think I showed you after the last interview, on my phone, the hundreds and hundreds of, little riff ideas and things that I have. Right. And my problem is that I have the technical wherewithal to record a song and do all of that stuff. But my problem is I don't have that wiring to understand like, what would be perfect right here is this sound effect, or a cello would be the perfect accompaniment for that. And I think that's a different skill set from the mixing and producing side of things. That is really neat. And I was curious though. So Mike Love and Brian Wilson, it's easy to kind of like find these duos in these groups that obviously feature more than just those two guys.
Right.
Was there ever any tension that you're aware of for the two of them?
Oh, without a doubt. But you have to remember, too, they were all related. It was the Wilson brothers. There were three of them in the band, and Mike Love was their cousin. So you have that dynamic where, families don't always get along. It's just natural.
But they came to it in adulthood, right? Because when I think of families and music, I think of the Jacksons, the Osmonds, there's another one that's obvious that I'm blanking on. Unless
the Partridge Family.
The Partridge Family. There we go. Yeah, right. There's always...
Oh, shadows of my youth, the 60s. The Partridge Family was on TV for years.
There's either a patriarchal or matriarchal figure. There's some leading, driving force that is really at the core of it. But for them, for the Beach Boys, they were already adults, right? When they formed? Or
No. They started when they were younger, and the Wilsons' father was more or less their driving force because he worked in a radio studio, so he kind of got them into it. But I mean, obviously, there was a lot of talent there because it wasn't just Mike Love and Brian Wilson singing; it was Carl Wilson and it was Dennis Wilson. They all sang. And they all had these wonderful voices, and you have 4-part harmonies in their songs. Again, they really were probably one of the best harmonic bands that ever was. When I start getting into harmony, then I also have to, bring up the Moody Blues because they're more. We used to call them your, tripping music, because they were really out there. But the harmonies in their sound, oh my goodness.
Was it okay? So Nights in White Satin, not White Room. Did they have?
That was Cream. Tuesday Afternoon.
Tuesday Afternoon, and then Your Wildest Dreams is by far my favorite tune from them.
Yeah, that was a little later in their career, but there's just too many to name. Question of Balance was one of the albums, but I tell everybody, if you really want to get a touch or a feel for the Moody Blues, just listen to their best of, because it almost sounds like an album that was a concept album. But it's taken from like 7 different albums that they had released, and they still kind of blended it into one song fits into the other. And singer in a rock and roll band, they had a lot of great songs.
We spoke really briefly about a band called Tool from the 90s and 2000s and whatnot. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but on Tool fans have a reputation for being insufferable because Tool music is they call it math rock at times. Like there's one a song that follows the Fibonacci sequence in terms of the lyrical syllables. Like they get really, really into it. And what I only found this out recently, last couple of years, that they have and none of their songs are like, pop radio friendly stuff. A lot of them are much longer. But somebody discovered that there were 3 songs, I think on the same album, but it's possible that it was spread across more than one album, that when you combine those 3 songs end to end, that it actually, or overlap them, I think that's what it was. I think if you combine them into the same audio file, that it creates essentially a new song where the lyrics, the new arrangement of the lyrics, they pick up and drop off perfectly. Wow. It's like that kind of thing is
I hadn't heard that, but that's really wild. That's next level.
And I love,
maybe they were mathematical geniuses, because if that's true, wow, I can't even conceive of putting 3 songs together like that and have it create a 4th song.
It's wow. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I was never a big Tool fan. I've listened to Tool music, and I didn't know that they were difficult to.
Well, so and it's like that's the kind of like apocryphal stuff that I love. Like, was it Zeppelin or was it the Beatles that had it where if you played something backwards, it was like a satanic?
Right. I think they talked about that with just about every band at one point.
Right. Well, the Satanic Panic that gripped the nation.
Please, yes, we did have that, and yeah. All the moms don't listen to that anymore. Yeah.
But I love that kind of stuff where there's hidden things or extras. Have you ever heard the term pre-gap? I know that's it's got an awkward kind of ring to it.
Yeah. No.
So there is I'm probably butchering the technical term for it, but when CDs came out, it's a storage media, obviously.
Yeah.
And so there's a small segment before track 1 that holds some kind of like loading information or something to it. Somebody found out that you were able to access that. And so some bands actually have either not full songs, but like extra stuff that's put in there in the pre-gap. And the only way you can get there, so this goes back, obviously we're dating ourselves again here, but when you had the CD player, like it was something like rewinding all the way back from, the 0 mark on track 1 for a certain number of time or something. There was a way to access it where you could actually hear it, which again, that kind of thing always sounds cool.
Who thinks of these things? That's the same with playing albums backwards. Who does that?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And it's funny. There's a video game studio called Rockstar Games. So they do the Grand Theft Auto games and Red Dead Redemption, and they are renowned for doing that exact thing. And it's amazing because of the intricacy involved in some things. So I remember Tim enjoyed watching me play a Grand Theft Auto 5, and I remember finishing it. We got to 100%, and there had to be like these very specific sets of conditions between the weather, the time, the confluence of all this stuff. And if you went to a certain place at a certain time, you could see a UFO. And like, again, the coding, to be able to find that stuff out is just, it really is unbelievable. But again, right, it's to go back to the Beach Boys, I think it's just being wired differently, like being able to think not so much outside of the box, but just looking at a situation from a perspective that nobody else would.
Okay. And going back to the backwards music, that the Beatles also, on I Am a Walrus, if you play the backwards, Paul's dead, right. That was the big rumor, and there's oh no, McCartney died, and this was 1968, 68, 69.
But there's
yeah, it's crazy.
The 60. What a surprise!
I think McCartney's still alive. I've seen him.
Well, I've heard that there was a conspiracy that's a replacement. That's not the the original one. And to be, I mean, conspiracy theories in the 60s. I wonder what could have caused could have caused all that.
I am not a criminal.
Yeah. So we were discussing the Moody Blues, and that's more. I think of them as being like a 70s era rock band.
They actually did start in the early 60s, and their sound was so much different too. If you can look it up, a song called Go Now. I'm sure you've heard it at some point. But yeah, that was the Moody Blues, and it was so different from what they became. And I still think it's a great song. It just isn't what I picture the Moody Blues as anymore.
Right. Well, they were evolving their sound, and that's I guess I just have a weird default setting in my head when I think of decades and bands, right? So for me, the 60s is the Beatles on one end of the stereo spectrum,
right,
and then Jefferson Airplane at the other, where it's,
the Rolling Stones are from the early 60s on. I mean, that's a band that's been playing, 60 years now.
Yeah, but and I don't know what the association is in terms of the sound, but with Jefferson Airplane, I think of like the Turtles, right? I think of
Flo and Eddie.
Yeah. So, and I guess just the way the sound is from the Greatest Hits album that you were talking about with the Moody Blues, I just, from my brain, the reference for that is like the 70s or like the early 80s, pre-synths and all that. But one of my favorite bands that I really need to take a deeper dive into their catalog is Yes. And we've discussed them. I am a sucker for great piano work and great keyboards. And
you certainly had that in spades and Yes.
And so
not just Rick Wakeman, you had Trevor Downs.
And I'm coming off of the high perch that I was on with Ray from The Doors.
Okay.
And I'm willing to concede that those guys in Yes are the superior keyboardists. I was just going with the signature, like, iconic sound.
As much as I love Ray Manzarek and The Doors, absolutely no. On a skill level, right.
100%.
He's not in their league. And nor is he in, Keith Emerson's league. Well, again, he's not with us anymore, but...
Right. So I saw, and what did it for me, funny enough, is exactly what you said. It was a performance on Access TV on Verizon. And it was a Yes concert, and I watched. It was just an intro.
Now, was it Yes from the 70s or Yes from now, which is a totally different thing because I think it was probably around 2000, the early 2000s, when John Anderson got sick and couldn't tour with them, so they replaced him, and now they won't let him back in the band, even though he's fine.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a later performance,
okay,
or from a more recent time. But it was more just the intricacy of the keyboard parts and just seeing, obviously, I when I think of Yes, I think of like virtuoso guitar, virtuoso keyboards, and just the layering, like the vocal layering and stuff, is great. I'm trying to think, like Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Yeah.
Clearly not indicative. That was an awful sound. I'm going to start that over.
For them, the Owner of a Lonely Heart wasn't one of their, it was a good song. It just, to me, wasn't one of their better tracks. They had so many more, like going back to older Yes.
My favorite Yes song is Roundabout. I don't know how you can go wrong with that.
No, you can't. Well, that was why it was an encore for so many years.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about the era that we live in, and I think we're both pretty lucky. You've obviously gotten to live through more decades than I have, but you're
somehow survived them.
Whether you remember them or not is immaterial.
It's a story for another day.
But we're also old enough and not too old enough to appreciate the era that we live in now. And one of the things that I was really resistant to a few years ago was YouTube, in terms of these, I'm just going to call them YouTube guitarists, right? So they were these guys, largely guys, that made names for themselves and had millions of followers by doing all sorts of, like, I don't know, what I would consider like asinine stuff. It was definitely me being sort of highbrow about it. But one of the benefits that I realize about YouTube overall is it's given a platform to a lot of amazingly skilled amateur musicians that I would never have had the opportunity to encounter. And one of the things that I'm thinking of is finger style guitarists. I know I've sent you a couple different videos from a couple different guys, but there was one guy who did roundabout, and he combined everything. Like he was playing obviously the acoustic intro part, but then when it kicks in, he's playing the bass notes, the vocal melody, and the guitar, all finger style. And the comments on the video were, this guy did this during a lunch break. He didn't do he did like, let's say 2.5 minutes of the full song.
Right.
But my gosh, it's just,
if you're finger picking on that song, how?
Yeah,
that's gotta, I can't even imagine how difficult. But you talk about, and I was fortunate enough to see them a few times, and they put on such tremendous shows.
Did they have lights and stuff? Or?
Yeah, light show. And one particular tour, they had the stage set up in the center of the floor, and it was, in the round. The stage actually rotated around, so at one point you would be, having John Anderson facing you, and then another point he'd be, putting his back to you. But I think it was a neat idea in that no matter where you sat, at one point in the show, you got to see the band playing their music as they were facing you, and it had to be more enjoyable for a lot of the fans. But what a vocalist, John Anderson. My God, how could he hit them notes? Such a high range.
Yeah, it was like a clarion call, like the clarity, too, of those notes ringing out. But that's what I loved about Plant and some of the higher stuff, especially like Immigrant Song, right? That's the obvious one. But, so, all right, we're here.
Right, the vocal range is just,
And that's just it. If you look at, I don't know if it's Babe, I'm Going to Leave You or Going to California. I think Going to California is where he starts off really low and then starts to work his way up. And
I think he does the same in Babe, I'm Going to Leave You as well.
Them, right?
Okay.
Senior moment here, sorry.
Please.
But, this is a band, I don't remember if we spoke about them on the podcast, but I love Heart so much. And
no,
Ann
we
Wilson,
did not.
Okay,
and yes. Oof.
She is the and I know, listen, Whitney Houston gets a lot of love and understandably so, but for me, just for rock, 100% sure. But for me, Ann Wilson is the greatest female vocalist of all time because of the range and the power. That woman belts out those songs, and there are a lot of pretenders to the Led Zeppelin throne, and a lot of groups.
They actually had the seal of approval from Led Zeppelin because when they heard their cover of,
was it Rock and Roll?
Yeah, I think it was Rock and Roll. They were like blown away because she, again, man, what a powerful voice.
And the same, and that's just it. So many of these groups that were inspired by Zeppelin, and listen, you're always going to have that. There are bands that it's very difficult to shake your influences as a creative person. And I know that personally as a writer, that early on, it's awful. And you're fortunate if you ever get past it and find your own voice. And she clearly, it's funny because they came out of Seattle I can't even say before the grunge era. Obviously they were, it was concurrent with it. Like they started way before, but they were there still.
No, they were definitely before the grunge era, but
still going strong throughout it.
Absolutely. And I guess being from Seattle, it had to have some pull for them, some, basis of their sound. But again, Heart really, wow, they're a fantastic band still.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I don't know if you saw the Kennedy Honors.
No, I did not see that, but yeah.
But I think they did Stairway, which was kind of a bummer because that's not where. It was phenomenal.
They did it right. They did it justice.
But there was two problems that I had with it. One was that didn't capture the essence of what makes Heart great. And in terms of their covering, it's the energy. So, those there were other better songs for that. Number one. Number two, Robert Plant hates that song.
Right, he doesn't. Right,
he really doesn't hide that hatred very well.
No, he does not. He's not a fan of the song. Well, but again, here we are with Robert Plant, he has evolved, and that's in my book still a plus. Would I like to be going to see Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones with Jason Bonham on the drums? Oh, absolutely. I would pay good money to go see them, but that's not where Robert Plant is at. He has moved on and followed his own muse.
Now, I don't know how you would categorize. You're far more well-versed in his post Zeppelin catalog than I am. But I feel like his sound, not counting the Alison Krauss, the Sands,
right. That's
album,
just
that's like a folk
bluegrass.
Yeah,
that's full blown bluegrass music.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, that's a hard couple words to put together.
I feel like some of his stuff almost bordered on world music, and I know that's like a weird category, but that's how I would describe it.
Mighty Rearranger, one of the discs that he released, and now it's probably 10 years ago or more. My son and I sat and we discussed this, and it was like, I don't know how you categorize this record. It's rock and roll, but it's not rock and roll. It just, right, world music might be the better way because it does encompass different sounds. You know, he still has that Eastern influence that he willingly plays to. But again, it's, I still would like to see them play together. I mean, now I don't think we'll ever see either of them really touring again. You know, well, Robert Plant's still doing the thing with Alison Krauss, but Jimmy Page is 79, just tougher. You know, I know I couldn't do something like that 3 or 4 nights a week, get up on stage for 3 hours.
Well, I was shocked to see that Clapton's got some shows put up because he fell off. I guess was it the neuropathy? I think that's what it was. I think it was neuropathy in his hand that made it more difficult for him to play. But then there was also like a touring issue and stuff.
Now he really is slow hand.
I knew it was coming.
Bump.
But the one guy I don't want to get. I want to, you know what? Let's talk about Stairway first, and then I want to talk about John Miles.
Okay, I was just going to tell you that the one thing I do want to discuss is John Miles, who we did miss last time, and there's a couple other artists. Well, we did get to the Moody Blues. So
I feel like this is fodder for an episode unto itself, because we've never really had this discussion per se.
Okay.
But I actually have a list of what I consider to be like the greatest songs of all time.
I think everybody does. It's an ever-evolving list because it depends on where my mind is on any given day.
And the more, it's funny, the more I think about it, the more complicated it becomes for me. So I try to limit it. But I noticed that more often than not, and so I had an infatuation with Freebird for a while. So that's why that was up there, up towards the top.
The text I sent you was right spot on.
It was great
for something.
And but then so that's the problem, right? As you hear, I start thinking about Freebird, and then I'm like, well, Sweet Home Alabama's pretty good, and Tuesday's Gone, and Simple Man.
Give me 3 steps.
Give me 3. That's another great one.
Oh man, they had so much, and they packed it into such a short time.
Oh, they exactly. Yeah. Oh man.
Wow. Unfortunately, they didn't have that long history. I mean, sure, they're still playing, but now there is not one original member in the band.
Was it Ronnie Van Zant was the no who?
Yeah, Ronnie Van Zant, the singer. Yeah.
So my top 2,
or
and
Johnny
I think
Van Zant.
one of those guys. My top 2 songs, and Stairway was number 1, lock solid for the longest time. Right. But Hotel California, I almost want to slip that into the top spot. Okay. But the reason for both songs, because I've thought at length about it, right? What is it about those 2 songs in particular that share some things in common that elevate them above just typical songs? Because there's thousands upon thousands of great songs, but there's something for me at least that elevates both of those to a status that no other song really can reach. And I think it's the epicness of the buildup of the song and the mysticism that comes with it, right? There's a dreamlike quality, and for me,
absolutely,
to both songs.
How they both build to this amazing crescendo. I would add other songs, obviously. Kashmir to me is the greatest song that Led Zeppelin ever recorded. It's not my favorite Led Zeppelin song, but Game admires Game, and Kashmir was just. That was the epitome, right? The best. I mean, I don't think you could top that.
No, and
they came close. Presence, Stairway, but
so for me with Kashmir, the Eastern influences are phenomenal. The alternate tuning that he used, I think he used Dadgad for that. Right. The riff, the heaviness. I mean, it's like a slow burning like metal song, and then the the vocals. Another song. So for me, Kashmir and Dream On are at the next tier, just below that.
if you were, well, and I know, unfortunately, you weren't fortunate enough to see that when Robert Plant and Jimmy Page toured in '95 with orchestrals behind them.
Oh.
They had a regular orchestra and an Indian orchestra. Kashmir became another song totally, and it was even better.
Oh, I'll have to check that. I'm sure.
You can listen to it on No Quarter, the disc they released, but still, yeah, when you see it live, it's always better off.
So the thing with Stairway, though, aside from like the lilting flute, there's so many minute details that I never really picked up on until I was trying to learn to play the solo. And I was using, it's a tablature program called Tux Guitar. And the Tux Guitar files are, so obviously when you're trying to learn tablature, it's like numerical sheet music. So it's just static on the page. This program allows you essentially to play it. So you can hear the notes as it's going through. Yep. And I never noticed the gradual increase in the tempo. Like, I mean, I felt it, but I didn't actually see numerically what was happening. And it really is fascinating just to see how they built the song. And again, just the way it starts to build up slowly, the way everything sort of like loops back upon itself. It's almost like a conch shell. Wow.
Again, tough things, words to put together.
I should have just gone with Fibonacci spiral because that one worked before. But that if you want to think of like the golden ratio and all that, it really does sort of follow that, where it loops back on itself, but not precisely, you know, it just keeps adding to it. And then for me, and I know this is like the trite answer, obviously the Comfortably Numb guitar solos, for me at least, are the two greatest ones ever recorded. Right. But I love the one in Stairway because it fits it perfectly from start to finish. It's just the way it builds up and then leads into the outro section.
Just blasting.
And so it's great. And then lyrically, that's the other thing too. Like, it has enough. Again, I don't want to say mysticism because clearly some of their other stuff is involving the occult and stuff. But that dreamlike,
it fits. Yeah, no, it absolutely fits.
And so. And then you've got Hotel California, which is the same kind of thing. And again, you want to talk about live versions of the song transcending any recorded ones.
Sure.
I mean, the Hell Freezes Over tour version is ridiculous. Then you've got like other ones, and it may be that one that I'm thinking of, that it's like almost like a flamenco guitar solo for Joe Walsh. And it's just, but that's what I mean. Like, those songs have just something extra. And again, like, you want to talk iconic. You hear that first strummed chord for Hotel California, or the first arpeggio for Stairway. You're just transported.
And there is someone else that we had not discussed previously who doesn't get near enough credit for his genius, Joe Walsh. He still is, because I first remember listening to Joe Walsh when he was playing in the James Gang with his brother. I think there was one other person with them. It might have been a trio, might have worked, but they had some awesome music even then. And I still like when he joined the Eagles, I'm like, what's he thinking? Because the Eagles they were kind of just a mellow country rock band, and I'm like, what's Joe Walsh doing going there? And obviously you see the result.
So again, now I've got a trident fork in the road here of tangents, because we're still going to get to John Miles.
Yeah, but trust me, I will not let us forget John Miles today.
I'm shocked more that Henley and Glenn Frey. I really should have looked it up because it's killing me if it's Frey or Fry. I'm just going to say Frey. So that they would want him in the band because of the personality clash. Listen, I don't think I've ever seen someone have more fun playing music than Joe freaking Walsh.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. He enjoys himself. I mean, I think his song "Life's Been Good," he wrote that about himself.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just autobiographical in nature. He's having a good time, and God bless him for it.
But I think I know what it is that attracted him to them. It definitely wasn't the guitar playing, because his song, no. you know a Joe Walsh Eagles song when you hear it clearly. Yeah. But he is such an underrated harmonizer and vocalist in his own right.
Absolutely.
And it's funny because you don't really appreciate it, at least for me, right? Like when you think of like Funk 49 and Rocky Mountain Way, like all those songs, like, he sounds great singing, but the harmonies and that's the softness to it is just not there.
If you listen to Pretty Maids All in a Row from the Hotel California album, that's Joe Walsh.
Yeah.
And He had a better singing voice than he's given credit for.
All right, so before we get to John Miles, you just mentioned Joe Walsh. So I thought of Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt earlier when we were talking about the Beatles, right? Because you've got Lennon and McCartney as the duo there, and then you've got Glenn, whatever his last name is, and Don Henley, and then you have the other two. So for me, like, Joe Walsh is the equivalent of George Harrison.
Right, in that they were only giving him one song on an album.
And clearly far more talented than they were given credit for. And then Ringo and Timothy B. Schmidt, an undeniable contributor to the band. To
the overall sound, but again, more or less overlooked.
Right, and then but Ringo wasn't even the original drummer, if I'm...
No, you're correct. Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with Don Felder, because then you had another member that was sort of part of the founding thing. Right. The other part of the Trident...
Pete Best.
Who was it?
Pete Best, the original
Pete Best,
drummer
right.
of the Beatles. Yeah.
Did you know that Jackson Browne co-wrote the Eagles song Take It Easy?
I did know that. And as someone else we really never discussed, Jackson Browne is such a talented artist. I mean, it's a different style of music. You have to really,
How would you categorize it?
Is it soft rock? Is it country rock? Is it folk music? He reminds me of someone we've neglected to bring up last time, James Taylor, who has to be one of the all-time greatest, folk music players, or soft rock, if you will. I love JG. He just has so many good songs. And one of the first 5 albums I ever owned, Sweet Baby James. Yeah, that was a great disc. Great album.
I associate him with the acoustic guitar on a short list of other performers. I can't imagine him holding an electric or...
No, I don't think he even owns a... I mean, he may. I obviously don't know.
But I think of him and Joni Mitchell, and there's certain ones that, again, they have a certain spirit about them. We talked about that with Tom Petty and Bob Seger.
But there's also an awful lot of talent there, because you watch him, he'll be playing lead and rhythm at the same time, and that is really not an easy thing to do.
No, he has an effortless vocal,
the vocal quality, just effortless, it seems. Obviously, it's not, but... Yeah, so many songs of his. They're almost like the soundtrack to your,
Fire
your
and
summer
Rain?
or Fire and Rain.
That's probably my favorite.
Yeah, Sweet Baby James again.
Yeah,
from that album. Just too many. How Sweet It Is.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
It's a little older or more recent. But.
I feel like that one has sort of jumped the shark and entered, that's like the classic
pop.
No, not even just the pop, but the usage of it, right? So it's either like
you hear
a
it
Sweet
at every
16.
event.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, any event you go to, like that was played last night at the retirement party.
Right, exactly.
So it's
no, and it's funny, right? Like I'll go through these phases where I just sort of get fixated on an artist or just a song or whatever, and for some reason. Lately, it's been Somebody's Baby from Jackson Browne. I don't know what it is. I think part of it is the instrumentation. And that's why, like, I can see the country rock, I can see the folk rock, I can see a lot of it, but there's just still that quality to it that's got like almost like an 80s sort of vibe to it,
Or his own uniqueness, if you will. Yeah, and I'm really glad to hear that I'm not the only one that does that kind of thing where I'll fixate on a song or an artist for a day, a week, a month, a weekday.
I'm on week 2 with Somebody's Baby.
Okay. But, that either means that we're both nuts or, but I'm sure other people are like this. Please let us know.
Yeah. That's right. We're on the tightrope there. So John Miles.
John Miles. That's an artist I know I turned you on to. And I really hope that you did enjoy that disc, because to me, it just almost sums up a life in that, what the song music means, because it just really covers everything. It's like, as the songs say, it was his first love and it'll be his last, music of the future, music of the past. I love all kinds of music, and I don't like being pigeonholed as, he's an old rocker, or, you know.
Oh, no, I'm pretty sure anybody who listened to the first episode clearly understands that, you know.
Yeah, he's got a couple screws loose.
No.
Just the entire,
open.
the entire disc. I mean, he is someone that was very underappreciated. He never made it big in the industry. I mean, he also he did a lot of the vocals on the Jimmy Page Outrider disc, which not many people are aware of, except for the one song that, you know, Robert Plant did with him on that. But yeah, John Miles, he played every instrument on that disc as well.
Before it was cool. Yeah. Before everybody started doing it nowadays.
Yeah, because that is from the early to mid 70s that he did that. So if anybody can, it's called John Miles Rebel is the title. If you can find it, check it out. It's really worth a listen.
So I'll give you my response to it, because I put that CD in, I started listening to it, and first of all, I was blown away. I was mortified that this album existed for as long as it did, and I've existed for as long as I have, and I had never heard it. I not only had I not heard it, I had never heard of it or of him.
Wow.
He just completely went under my radar. And as lame as this is going to sound, and clearly I'm lame in spades, so I don't care. When I heard that album, I was about halfway through when it clicked and when it registered. And again, this is where it gets soppy and sentimental. Right. But I felt like I had found, from a musical standpoint, a lifelong friend that I never knew I had.
Right.
And it was like this tidal wave of like getting caught up. Like it was like, it's always been there. And I guess I say that because Billy Joel's a great example of this, where like that's the earliest musical memory I have. My mom was a huge Billy Joel and Elton John fan, right? So there's like a certain nostalgia or a certain connection to it. And I kind of look back, and then there are other songs or albums or things. I think everybody has this if you're a music fan. You know?
She must have been in heaven if she got to see that tour that they did together.
You know what? I think she might have. And so there is history with certain artists or bands or songs or whatever that I don't have with John Miles, or didn't think I had until I did. Like, again, it just felt like it was always there, and it was just like almost like a favorite. Maybe this is a better example. It felt like a favorite book that is cherished, that hasn't been opened in decades.
So long, and you start reading it again, and you can't put it down.
That's exactly it. Yeah. No, he was just amazing. And so you mentioned that he played, it's funny now with kids sports and everything, right? There's all the specializing and stuff. And I feel like it was the opposite back then. Like, you know, with music, you were a guitarist only. That was this or that, not
Yeah, you played guitar or you played bass. You couldn't do both, or, you know, piano or, you know, whatever else involved.
So
obviously he didn't do the orchestral parts.
Well, heck, but you know what?
He could have probably.
Did McCartney do any of the strings and stuff? I feel like he did. I feel like he was one of those like sort of jack of all trades kind of.
I really don't know. I can't imagine. I mean, obviously McCartney is uber talented. You know, the ability to play the piano, the bass, and lead guitar.
And he's a decent drummer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's definitely serviceable there, which is the perfect segue to the other musical part. And then I wanted to hit you up about some baseball stuff.
Okay, absolutely.
So I think we touched on this off the air the last time, but I was fascinated by the number of drummers that became lead singers and then went off and became solo artists.
Okay.
And again, I feel like that's a great, top 10 sort of article thing or whatever. You know, obviously you've got Don Henley is arguably the most successful. I wouldn't say, because I don't know how well he sold. Well, no, so Phil Collins was the one I was going to get to.
Yeah, he might have more success as, just as a single artist.
Right. I was going totality, right? If you look at just purely albums sold by the Eagles, and then Don Henley's solo albums, because remember, for Don Henley, right, he had Boys of Summer, which, again, we'll get to that with the baseball stuff in a second. Dirty
That's
Laundry.
That's a very good segue, and Boys of Summer.
And then, you know, the other, and the same thing, right? So Phil Collins covered Cyndi Lauper, right, with True Colors. He covered, another song.
Well, he covered a lot of the older, artists as well,
like R&B stuff for that. Yeah. So Henley didn't necessarily cover any of that stuff. He had Patti Smith, I think he did a song with, and then I think there was another one too. Sometimes Love Just Ain't Enough. But it's funny, the egos of these guys clearly had to have been a catalyst for what propelled them forward. But I find it so fascinating to see the genesis of it.
Yeah, very good.
Where, these guys, they obviously it's different in the Eagles because it was really just the two of them to begin with. But Genesis specifically. So wait a second. This is what I wanted to do. So I'm thinking of, in terms of drummers that went on to become lead singers of bands, you've got Don Henley is an obvious one. Right. Genesis, it gets the asterisk because we're going to come back to that, because not only did they have...
He didn't start out as a vocalist at 12. Well, he might have done some backing vocals early on. But yeah, you're right. He was not the lead vocalist at all. He didn't sing much throughout the early part of Genesis.
Right. And then you have... I have a hard time using this one as an example, but Dave Grohl started out as the drummer in Nirvana. Then became... everything for the Foo Fighters. So that's not really the same kind of thing, but I feel like there were other ones.
Yeah, that counts, Dave Grohl, because you said he started as the drummer, just the drummer, and
But I feel like there's a third one, like historically speaking, that I should be
Ringo, Ringo's had a tremendous career now. He's still doing it with his all-star band.
So my reference for Ringo just out to me as an 80s kid, because I remember him as being Mr. Conductor from, was it Shining Time Station, I think was the show? So it was a PBS show.
No, I do remember that, he did the show, but I can't recall the title.
But the best part was the other guy that I think either he replaced him or was replaced by him, George Carlin. And it's funny because in some of his sets he referenced that. He's like, and I'm telling the truth because I was Mr. fucking Conductor. And but we talked briefly about the confluence of ego between you. So you need in my mind, right? You need a certain amount of ego to be a successful front person, male or female, for the band.
Without a doubt. No, you have to.
Because of the swagger involved.
Right. You're the person that's up front selling. So, you have to have, I think, a pretty big size.
Exactly.
Ego,
And we spoke about, the bass players are often the overlooked ones, but typically, as much as it kills me to say this, like the best guitarists that I've met are actually bass players who just, fiddle around on guitar on the side. And that's frustrating, to devote yourself to an instrument like I have. It's still a suck in comparison with someone who's using only 4 strings. But that's neither here nor there. The drummer, though, again, right, if you're especially in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the drummers are the wild child, and all that. And so that...
It kind of tended to be that way, yeah.
Yeah, and because we talked about Keith Moon and Bonham and all that.
Bonham, yeah.
And so it's funny when you have the drummer that then becomes the lead singer. And what I'm noticing, though, is the stylistically, right? We talked about Copeland. We talked about a little bit about like Neil Peart and some of these other guys. They had, again, a more animalistic, like energized approach to playing the drums. Don Henley and Phil Collins were not that, they were just timekeepers, essentially, right?
And if you come around full circle, I'll go all the way back to the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson was the drummer, and he was an animal as well.
Oh, okay, so that's interesting.
He was just, he probably made Dennis look, Dennis was the drummer.
Okay.
Dennis made Brian look calm.
Tame, right.
Yeah, tame by comparison.
And that's why with, Phil Collins and Don Henley, I guess I feel like they were always lead singers who just happened to be the drummers
as well.
And if it's how many bands like Genesis are there that have a singer like Peter freaking Gabriel and then managed to replace him? I mean, he was ousted essentially. Right. Salisbury Hill covers that pretty nicely, which again, you want to talk finger picking and stuff? Right. That is one of the best songs for me of all time. I love Peter Gabriel. You talk world music and stuff. In Your Eyes and Salisbury Hill. Oh, those are on my my top 25 songs.
Again, you come at it from a different angle because you do play guitar, and would open it up to you. Like you said, with the finger picking style on these songs.
Well, just like
you
Blackbird, right?
Yeah.
From the Beatles. It's just kind of got this jaunty.
Blackbird is one of them songs that it's so good, and because they have so much other stuff that's fantastic, it doesn't get its due. But Blackbird is an awesome song.
Yeah, and so moving from Peter to Phil. You look at Phil Collins and you look at Don Henley, and it really is amazing. Now, listen, I know you're more of a fan of the earlier era Genesis stuff, and I think a lot of people are. For me, I guess it's probably I'm not a huge prog rock guy to begin with, and so I associate or I connect more with their really pop stuff. You know,
the funny thing is I think my favorite Genesis album was Duke, and that was newer, and that is with Phil singing But because there's just so much good stuff on that singular disc.
The Doobie Brothers. That's the other one that I was thinking of, where they added Michael McDonald.
Yes.
But again, right? So it's funny. I love, you want to talk greatest hits, Volume 1 and Volume 2 from the Doobie Brothers.
Okay.
What a combination of tracks, or what a collection of tracks, because you've got...
a band that I've seen the Doobie Brothers touring with, and we haven't really discussed them. Again, with a lot of great music, Chicago.
Oh, man.
I mean, and that's before, with Peter Cetera, and then after, they still managed to talk about lead singers that just kind of decided they've had enough. But Chicago was, they have so many great songs.
And oh man, so every year in the summer since we got the minivan in 2014, I fell in love with Yacht Rock, the station.
Okay,
I didn't realize it was an actual genre or whatever. It's really just like 70s soft rock. So Steely Dan, Chicago, all that stuff. Yeah. And so for years, that's what the kick was. Recently, this year specifically, I'm on this new country station, and that started when Sarah and I went down to Florida. We were able to get only 2 stations in the rental car. It was some
and they were both country.
No, it was pop rap or whatever from Orlando, and then this country station. And so I've been vacillating between the two, and so many of these great bands that eluded me until I started listening to Yacht Rock. America is one. You know, I knew Horse with No Name, but I didn't know Sister Golden Hair.
Yeah,
or,
they had they had 4 or 5 really big hits, and then obviously another whole library full of music that was maybe nearly as good as that, but not, didn't get the airplay.
Yeah, and you mentioned Chicago. I feel like there's like a spider web, right? And so I can connect nodes from one band to the next and probably make it all the way across somehow. But for me, I've always associated...
Kevin Bacon and 6 Degrees.
Yeah, pretty much. But I've always associated Chicago with REO Speedwagon, and I don't know why. I think some of the more radio-friendly hits... Now listen, Chicago is completely different.
They were different bands, but I guess I could see... See, I connect them with the Doobie Brothers because it seemed like for 5 years in a row, they were touring together every summer, and I was fortunate enough to see a couple of the shows at the Art Center.
Blackwater, man. That gets it done. That gets it done for me.
Yeah, and 25 or 6 to 4, and
That's probably so. My 2 favorite Chicago songs. Obviously, you have like the ballads, right? You're the inspiration and all those.
Yeah.
But 25 or 6 to 4 and Saturday in the Park.
Yes, them 2 songs.
Is it the? I'm trying to think if it's horns. Yeah, it's horns.
It is
Saturday in the Park.
yes,
man.
Yes.
And that's just like Jerry Rafferty is another. That's a good separate topic too, to kind of go into not the one-offs, but guys who sort of flew under the radar, because he was with Steelers Wheel, but they really just had Stuck in the Middle, and that's really famous only because it was in Reservoir Dogs.
Right.
Like
Jerry, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of John Rafferty. He's like a local artist that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, considered one of the best bar bands of all time. It's John Rafferty and the Beaver Brown Band.
Locally, as in like Keyport locally? Or?
No, locally Monmouth County.
Oh, Monmouth County. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, Jerry Rafferty, and again, he's another one. So obviously, Baker Street is his best known song. It's Tim's favorite song of all time. We love listening to that.
Good choice, Tim.
But we've heard some other ones right down the line. It's. I mean, I don't want to go too far down the Jerry Rafferty rabbit hole, but he had a really messed up sort of life towards the end. Like it's worth the Wikipedia if you're into into that.
I'm gonna have to look into it because I don't recall.
Oh, I would check. Yeah, he had like a huge drinking depression problem, and it was
say that like it's a bad thing.
Well, for him it was a problem. For other people, it might not be. No, Chicago's great. And so just to circle back to Phil Collins and Henley, it's so amazing to me. And Sting is another great example. He was a bass player, not the drummer. But these guys who
then came forward. Well, actually, he was forward in the Police anyway.
Right. Well,
and you don't have too many bass players that are the lead vocalist.
No, and what's
John Wetton comes to mind.
From
John Wetton, I guess the biggest group that he was ever in was Asia. I know he had played in other bands, and I can't think of who it was.
There you go. That's another yacht rocker there. 99, Toto.
He plays with Joe Bonamassa and...
Oh, Joe Bonamassa's another one.
But Black Country Communion. I can't think of the bass player's name. That is also the lead vocalist. But he played with Deep Purple at one time. But bass players that were lead vocalists are also rather rare.
And the vocal quality, Sting is just such an amazing singer.
And actor.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no,
I've seen him in quite a few different things.
But for each of those guys, they had so much success with bands that in and of themselves had so much success. And then to have the solo careers that they had, it's funny, right? Because I feel like towards the end, especially Michael McDonald, he's a perfect example of this. Right. The personality becomes so strong that the band loses its identity and becomes too wrapped up in the new guy. In the same way Genesis did with Phil Collins.
Right. Like you said, the ego gets so big, now it's got to be Michael McDonald and the Doobie Brothers. It can't be the Doobie Brothers. Yeah, that kind of really freaked me out with a couple of bands that it came to that where the lead vocalist wanted top billing or as much as I loved their sound, the Black Crowes.
The Robinson Brothers, yeah.
Well, after a few years, Chris Robinson decided that he was firing everybody in the band. He didn't want them to leave. He just wanted them to become session players for him.
Right.
And then he only had to pay him like a per diem instead of getting a percentage of the gate and everything. And it was like really a dick move. But
percentage of the gate, that's a great opportunity, all right, to jump into baseball. So
there you go. Or actually, because you got back to Don Henley and the Boys of Summer. But yes, baseball.
So we had a listener question after the last episode.
Wow.
It may or may not have been my wife, but that's okay. She still listened, right? She's a good listener.
There you go.
So
has to be.
Her question for you, knowing that you are such a diehard baseball aficionado.
Okay.
And a legendary
Not
player.
just a Yankee fan.
Not just a Yankee fan.
Yeah.
No.
I love baseball.
You walk the walk. Okay.
Yeah,
you don't just talk the talk.
Okay. No, I freely admit to being biased by the Yankees, but I do love baseball.
And so the Yankees are a perfect preparatory topic.
Fire everybody in the front office. Oh, I'm sorry. We're not really talking about the Yankees.
No. So Mariano Rivera, I feel, popularized the walk-up music, the walk-out music as a closer, right? So Enter Sandman, and listen, I'm not a baseball fan.
And it fit him so well.
Oh, it really did. No,
he usually put the other team to sleep.
He really. I'm not going to make a joke about baseball because I know I have some friends that listen about being put to sleep. That's neither here nor there. But obviously, now we're in the era of, and I mean, I don't even know if they still do it, but the walk-up, the at-bat music.
Yeah, everybody has walk-up music now. I think it's absurd, but that's a story for another day.
So the listener question that you're going to think is absurd then is, with your musical acumen and your love of baseball, what would be, if you were to be a player today, what would your at-bat music be, or what would your walk-up?
Wow, that's a hard. I mean, it depends on how I feel on any given day, probably. But if just off the top of my head, I would say "Welcome to the Jungle."
Oh, I love that.
That's just because I just love that song.
Well, not to nerd out, but I feel like we would probably do something similar where, depending on the city you were in, I feel like you would choose a song. Like if you're in Detroit, you would do Bob Seger,
Motor City Madness.
Something appropriate for where you are.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Bob Seger song because you're in Detroit. I mean, that's so fitting. Dock of the Bay if I'm in L.A. Because that Otis, man, Otis Redding, and that seems like a California song.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what a great song that is.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Now, baseball and music for me are inextricably linked, right? You have Take Me Out to the Ball Game.
Yeah.
I mean, don't worry, we're not going down that, that whole...
Well, you have Creedence Clearwater, not
center field. Yeah, John
put me
Fogerty.
in. Yeah, John Fogerty, right.
So
Center field, yeah.
John Fogerty's going to have his own episode because there's so much to unpack with him.
Without a question.
There are so many great songs about baseball. Does American Pie mention it? Am I making that up? I feel like there was
there's something in American Pie. Yeah. I love that. That's another song we never really touched on.
Man.
And I heard the first time I ever heard that, I was sleeping over, my ex-business partner and one of my best friends forever, Mark. We were sleeping over his grandparents' house, and he had to sleep with the radio on for whatever reason. But I remember waking up at 2 a.m, and we had WNEW. That was where the hits were played, where all the great songs were. And I heard American Pie, and I was so floored by that song. I mean, God, that is just, talk about great music. I mean, and songs that just make you think. You know?
And again, that would be another fun category to sort of dive into is like songs that capture the American spirit or the American experience. I'm not really sure how to describe it.
American experience. Yeah, I like that because it is. It's
like a time capsule. Is the best way I could describe it.
I would have to agree because I'm just singing the song in my head right now, and it's just awesome.
And another epic song.
Yes,
and it covers so much.
Yep. And the 3 men I admired most.
Yeah.
The Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. But they caught the last train for the ghost.
And I was trying to translate that into Yankees. Do you have a Father, Son, and Holy Ghost for the
Yankees?
Is Gehrig, DiMaggio?
Too many great players. Lou Gehrig. I have a Lou Gehrig story in that when I was in the 6th grade, Mr. Brown was my teacher. We didn't change classes, and we had to do a book report. And he said, and after you write the book report, you have to do an oral report. And at that time, I couldn't speak in front of people. I just couldn't. And I said, can we do it on anything we want? And he said, yes. And I did it on Lou Gehrig. And that was the only way that I could talk because I was talking baseball. And so I got an A on that report, which might have been the only A I ever saw in the entire history of my schooling. But no. So Lou Gehrig is definitely one of my favorite Yankees of all time. Sparky Lyle, because Sparky Lyle was... I have Sparky Lyle stories too, but that's a story for another day.
So I wanted to bring up baseball in particular because it's sort of this weird hypocrisy within myself, right? So you've been embarking on some more adventures with your daughter recently, right?
Yes.
To go visit the ballparks.
We went to Detroit in May. Yeah.
And so Heather and I have been to all but 2 of the ballparks. We're down to Houston and San Francisco. And it's funny because I hate baseball.
But you went to Oakland?
But I've been to...
How do you go to Oakland and not San Francisco in the same trip?
So they weren't home.
So you weren't there long enough. Okay.
It was the honeymoon. And it was... So we flew from Newark to SFO.
Right.
I think it was the same night, actually. Like we landed, noon or whatever it was. And it was like a 7 o'clock first pitch or whatever.
Yeah, I had to kill you. Being on East Coast time.
Yeah,
sure.
so we went to the A's game the next day or the day after. We flew out to Honolulu and back. So and I wanted to save the Giants as the last one specifically for 2 reasons. One, though I'm not a baseball appreciator or fan in any sense, I grew up and I didn't even grow up in a sports house, but the only sport that ever came up was baseball, and it was the Mets.
Oh, you grew up in Brooklyn, right?
Right, so there's a strong family.
I'm surprised there's not a Dodger thing in your blood. Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to sort of get at eventually was baseball in your blood. My grandmother was a huge Dodgers fan until they left. And so that was the problem. And so that's, long story short, that's how we wound up as Mets fans, most of us, because it was rooting for the NL over the AL.
Certainly, yep.
And so the Giants obviously left too. And I think I told you this, that I was surprised to learn that the Mets colors came from the Giants and the Dodgers.
Right.
And coincidentally, each year we had a child born, the Giants won the World Series and we watched it. So in 2010, 2012, and 2014.
And
so I said, you know what, let's keep, and the ballpark looks really cool with the cove and all that stuff. Yep. So we were like, you know what, let's hold off and make that the last one. Because I've driven, that's an episode that I'm going to do in terms of the cities I've driven to that include, Seattle and Los Angeles.
Right.
I'm not driving back to San Francisco anytime soon.
I can't. Yeah, gotta be. I can't even. Well, no, I did go coast to coast, but that, yeah.
Yeah,
but we did it, on the fly. My son and I, we were just crazy.
Right. And for us, the intention was pre-COVID. We were targeting 2022 as an anniversary trip. Heather and I got married July 7th, 2007. And so that would have been, a big anniversary for us. Right. And so we were thinking the kids will be old enough. Well, let's go back to Hawaii, because we went to Hawaii on the honeymoon. The
slip of the tongue.
The honeymoon. I'm gonna have to tell you a joke off air that's gonna make somebody really unhappy, but it's too funny. I mean,
okay.
I'll come back to this in a second. Yeah. So we were. I think I told you this once, that I just have a thing where I don't make up these jokes; they just sort of come out of the ether.
No, absolutely.
And we were talking about. So I started doing this, and I was like,
there is no wrong answer here.
Yes, I do. And I said, did not go over well, but I thought it was great.
You didn't.
I did. Then yesterday, that joke comes up in the car.
Ouch.
The kids are laughing hysterically. I don't think they get it, but they're laughing because I'm laughing.
Why are you still married to this man, Heather?
Wait. This is even better. So we start talking about Hawaii and all this stuff. And she goes, oh, that's right. It was the honeymoon. And I was like, yeah. That went over like a Led Zeppelin. Let me tell you,
a lead balloon. Too.
Oh my goodness! But I almost had to pull over because I was on Navesink River Road or whatever over there. Where it gets ziggy zaggy.
I might have to go home and change my pants.
So yeah. So suffice to say that.
Oh, have mercy.
The edit for this is going to be great because that joke is not making it to the air, but the laughter is going to stick.
Well, anyway, getting back to baseball, my mom grew up in Kearney, and it was a long time ago. And there was a team that played there called they didn't play in Kearney. They played in Newark called the Newark Bears. That was a farm team for the New York Yankees. Hence the reason that I root for the Yankees. Because I didn't grow up with a team that was winning the World Series all the time. I grew up with the late 60s and early 70s Yankees that were the worst team in baseball for a few years. So I'm not a bandwagon jumper. And yeah, I just came to my Yankee rooting, it was inherited.
So my problem is that I grew up in... when I say growing up, I always sort of think of high school as the coming of age, growing up kind of time thing. And so for me, that was 97 to 2001. I think you can remember what happened between 96 and 2000.
Yes, I certainly can. And actually, my kids got to go to the 98 World Series. I took them there. That was, the Yankees dominated baseball. And that was a beautiful time.
And it was everywhere. Everybody and their mother was suddenly a Yankees fan in Brooklyn.
But can you imagine growing up in Brooklyn or anywhere in New York City in the 1950s? Or even the 40s, when you had the Giants and the Dodgers and the Yankees all within this,
oh my goodness,
15-mile radius, probably 10-mile radius for that matter. Wow, talk about great. I mean, oh my goodness, that had to be heaven. And they were all good, most of the time then. So,
see, I think... And this is what I wanted ultimately to ask you, is what do you think it is about baseball that contributes to its enduring legacy, number one, and number two, that enables people, even nowadays, still to be so involved with it and interested in it?
I think it is the ultimate American sport. I mean, it's something that we've all just grown up with. It's something that everyone can play. I mean, we can't play at their level because... there are, I think it's 750 Major League Baseball players right now. And we have a population of 300 million just in this country. And there are obviously players from other countries in the major leagues as well. You have to be uber talented. And even that might not be enough because each of these guys, everyone is an all-star. Everyone was the best player on their team growing up. And you still have to love the game, I think, to excel because it's a very frustrating game. I mean, you fail 7 out of 10 times, and you're still a Hall of Famer.
Right? It's, oh, man.
You know, think about that. It boggles the mind. Baseball it's just a beautiful game. I mean, yeah, it's slow, and I understand that people want more action these days. And there's not a lot you can really do about how baseball is played. I know they introduced a pitch clock, which I think the jury is out. I'm noticing a trend towards a lot of pitchers coming up with injuries. I think it has something to do with the fact that they aren't given enough time to collect themselves in between pitches.
Agreed.
It's adding too much stress. I mean, if you ever see a slow motion shot of the guy's arm when he's pitching that ball, that's an unnatural position for the body to be in. So that's got to be hard. And but again, baseball is something that we can all play, and I think that's why we relate to it, and that's why it still maintains its hold on the American public. Again, it's been passed by football, but that's still
well. All right, so there's a couple of things there. So for me, baseball's second on the list of detestations, right? Or it's more Knicks fans clearly. I mean, it's really like a top 10 list, and Knicks fans take the 1 through 9 spots. So baseball is really just 10 out of the 10.
I'm just not going to go there, Knicks fans.
Oh,
but yeah, I can see how Knicks fans definitely opinionated.
It's not even just opinionated, right? Because and the reason I'm even going to go there is, and I can't wait. I'm sorry,
Walt Frazier was the best point guard that ever played,
and the worst announcer of all time. Roger's biggest disciple,
the biggest butcher of the human language.
Oh my God! But I'm stoked. I bought something special to celebrate for this year because this is a special year for the Knicks. I don't know if you were aware of that.
50th anniversary of the last time they won a championship.
It's 50 years of ineptitude and failure. I cannot wait. I needed something worthy of that. And the best part is if you go back 50 years from the last time that they did win, it's 1923. Yeah. So we're just outside of World War I. Yeah. That's again,
story for another.
I have to keep...
And they will never win until James Dolan sells the team.
You know what? You could have just stopped that they will never win and I would have been happy camper, but I agree. But with baseball, so my problem with, and listen, there are a short list of Knicks fans that I actually respect for their fandom, and I genuinely do feel bad for them. My buddy Ryan, Sarah's coach, Sarah, there are some diehard Knicks fans that, just like you being a Yankee fan, right? You're realistic, you understand, like, listen, your team, at least where the Yankees, so this is the problem that I had growing up in New York when I did, because the Knicks had a moderate level of success in the playoffs through the 90s, they were viewed in and around town, if you want to call it that, as being like on par with the Yankees. The Yankees have won 27 World Series and have, pennants out the wazoo. The Knicks have 2 titles. Yeah. 2. And who else has 2 titles?
And they were 4 years apart.
Yeah, exactly.
So
who else in the baseball world, locally, Mike, has 2 titles?
Let me see. I think there's a team that plays in Flushing, which is what they really need to do with the entire organization anyhow.
They're on their way down the drain now, right? But that's what bothered me. And I did a whole blog entry about this once where I compared statistically the Knicks, the Mets, and the Rangers to look at their
I am a Ranger fan, but it's so hard to be a Ranger fan.
And listen, the Knicks definitely have a lot of playoff appearences, but when you look at lifetime records, like win-loss record, you look at number of championships, number of times it reaching the championship round. Now, when I did this, the Mets, I guess they were, I don't know, whatever it was. The point was that Knicks fans, delusional Knicks fans, think of the Knicks as being like the Yankees, whereas in reality, they're really more like the Mets.
They think they're on a par with the Lakers or the Celtics. Exactly. They are not, without a doubt. And that's the best rivalry in sports. I think the Lakers and the Celtics, because they played against each other so many times for the championship.
And I remember so many of the biggest jerks I've ever met, especially in high school and college, were baseball guys. They were just like this. And you know what it is? This is like a Dr. Phil kind of moment here, right? So I've never been a group guy. I've never had a group of friends. I've never been, a team sort of person where, or a fraternity guy or whatever. I'm very much individualistic, and baseball is very much a team sport. You're in it. You're part of the group, and so there's a certain swagger that comes with that, a certain mentality. And it's not like it doesn't exist for the basketball team or the football team or whatever, but there was just something about the arrogance of the baseball guys that really stood out to me in high school. And that really was the jumping off point for me, I think, with it. And you mentioned the pitch count and all that stuff with the sport. For me, it's funny. Most people who love baseball shit all over golf as being this like boring thing. And to me, those two sports are more closely linked than nearly any other because of the to be fair, the difficulty of it. There's hitting a fastball or a curveball or whatever.
What they say is the most single difficult act in all of sports is hitting a round ball with a round bat when it's coming at you at 90 plus miles an hour.
Right. And we've discussed Robin Williams and his whole thing on golf.
On golf, so. It just ruins a good walk. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or what's the point? Because like you said, you step up to this little ball, you hit it as far as you can, and then as soon as you find it, you hit it away again.
Right. If you're lucky. Because if you're...
What's the point of that? Yeah, like I said, it's just ruins a nice walk in the park to me.
But I thought it was funny that you mentioned the...
I know. You're just a good girl. I know.
Co-host Vendetta here. She's deciding to take over the show. So
it'd be nice if I put the on correctly. I only had one ear.
All right. So just to put an end cap on the baseball thing, you could hear the tail going. Oh man. So I just thought it was funny how they had to adjust for how boring the sport is, or at least how slow it is.
No, you don't want to chew the wire. You really don't. It's not good. Yeah.
Her tail is just...
She's going to knock herself out.
She is hard-headed. She fits right in this family, that's for sure, with the thick-headedness. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. But I just laughed at how, they had to institute these rules to try to make the game a little faster. And I get it. Right. Listen, a lot of it is attention span and whatnot.
Sure. And it was getting ridiculous. The average game was over 3 hours.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And that's just too long.
But so I did laugh because the same thing happened with golf where they had to have a pace of play, rules put in. So.
But this is to me, like, as a baseball fan, what really annoys me is, the game's too slow. The game's too slow. We got to do these things to make it faster. They still take that 2.5 minutes in between innings to go hawk stuff.
Right. I was just going to say, yeah, exactly.
Why does it have to be 2.5 minutes? Cut that down to a minute. They don't need 2.5 minutes to warm up in between innings. You really want to cut the games down? There. Stop breaking up the action for, 5 minutes for every inning.
If there was one thing I would complain about where baseball is concerned, it's the self-seriousness and self-righteousness of protecting the game. The unwritten rules and
they do have that. It's very, it is like that. I just, as someone who played the game a lot when he was younger, again, I know that I'm nowhere near as talented as these people, but it bothers me that they outlawed shifts in baseball. Well, if you want to play everybody over here, I'm going to hit the ball over there. But these guys won't do that. And it's like, well, why? Well, because I have a better chance to hit a home run if I do this. Like, well, but you can hit 300 if you hit it over there. And then they'll go over there, and then you can hit it there. Oh, it's just...
Chicks dig the long ball.
This is true. But I was never going to be a home run hitter, so I didn't have to... I couldn't worry about that. I just wanted to get on base and steal bases, and that's, different game.
Well, every one of these conversations is a home run for me, so I appreciate you coming back. I think I feel like this was more streamlined. I think we got back to
a little better
the topics for it.
We didn't dovetail quite as much, or as we used to say in the Bible studies I attended, we would go off on bunny trails. And we stayed a little bit more on topic today.
Yeah, and I think I was glad we got to give John Miles some love.
Amen. That's again, John Miles. God rest your soul. And we hit on a lot of other artists. The Doobie Brothers, Chicago, and we touched on Fogerty again. But we will never cover everything.
No, but
that's just not possible.
But that's also part of the fun of it. And
absolutely.
I would love to focus solely on what I'm going to call Americana acts.
Okay.
I think that'd be a fun discussion too.
Yes, because here I have another artist we had never talked about, and I don't know if I ever turned you on to him. His name is Kevin Moore, but he goes by Kebmo.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Kebmo is all Americana. He just plays blues, rock, and I've seen him play where it was just him and another guitarist, and I've seen him with a band, like a 5-piece. I have a couple discs I can let you have anytime. Just let me know what you think of him.
Yeah. No, I'm excited. I would like that very much. I'd like to check it out.
Without a doubt. I'll drop them off either later or tomorrow, whenever. Yeah, I know. She must be teething.
She is chewing on me like I'm a rag doll right now. But Mike, thanks so much for coming through and recording another episode.
Absolutely.
I hope it was fun. I always have a great time.
It is always a blast when we sit and talk.
And
absolutely.
Thank you to everybody listening, wherever and whenever you are.